Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. So today our topic is depression, and it's a tricky topic to talk about, so I ask for your prayers. So before talking about depression, we need to define it and to understand that there's a difference, very important difference between depression and being depressed. Because of course, this idea of being depressed, feeling sad, feeling upset, it's normal, happens to all of us. So there's clearly a spectrum of normal and abnormal sadness. If you lose someone that you love and you're sad, that's natural. If something difficult happens in your life and you're sad, that's natural. We may all have experienced periods in our life where I don't want to go anywhere, I don't want to see anybody, I don't want to talk to anybody. And so we may feel depressed, but it's important to understand that there's a difference between feeling sad, feeling depressed, and having depression. And depression is a diagnosis, and I just thought to share with you what that diagnosis is. So if you just imagine somebody walking into the office of a mental health professional, and they have to decide who has depression and who doesn't. If you think about it like with orthopedic surgery, it's a little bit easier. العظم سليم والعظم مش سليم, it's very easy. But with this it's a bit trickier because there's a spectrum of normal sadness, and then there's a point at which the sadness becomes abnormal. So how do they make that assessment? And there's criteria. There's a manual which is called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it's updated every number of years, and it just publishes criteria for various diagnoses. So they're up to number 5, and so this is the current criteria. So the individual must be experiencing 5 or more symptoms during the same 2-week period, and at least one of them needs to be depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. That's a little bit different to what the definition was in the 4th. So you need to have at least 5 of these. Number 1, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Number 2, diminished interest or pleasure in activities. So you used to love riding your bike and now you have no interest. You used to love playing the guitar, I don't want to play the guitar anymore. Significant weight loss when not dieting, or weight gain, or decrease or increase in appetite nearly every day. People respond differently in terms of their food when they are depressed. Probably all of us can categorize ourselves into one of these 2 categories. Some people, when they're anxious or they're down, they don't want to eat, and other people, food is their comfort. That's me, okay? The second one, a slowing down of thought and reduction of physical movement, which is observable by others. My thought is slow, my movement is slow, and other people start to notice. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Feeling worthless or inappropriate guilt nearly every day. Emphasize inappropriate, because some guilt is quite appropriate. If you're guilty about shouting at the kids when you shouldn't have, that's good. Okay, don't do that tomorrow. Speaking to myself. Diminished ability to think or concentrate, or recurrent thoughts of death, recurrent suicidal ideation without a plan, or a suicide attempt. So you need to have at least 5 of these for at least 2 weeks, and you must have one of the top 2. Now I'm not hoping that you're going to all go home and be able to diagnose depression in each other, but I'm just giving you a little bit of background about what actually is depression. What are these professionals looking for? How do people make the diagnosis? And very importantly, I want you to take away that there's a difference between depressed mood and having depression. Other aspects of the definition are that these symptoms must cause distress or impairment, and it must be not because of a substance or another medical problem. So for example, a classic one is someone with a severely underactive thyroid, right? that can cause a lot of these symptoms. If you're severely hypothyroid, your mood will be low, you'll have less energy, you'll sleep, you might be needing to sleep too much, you might not be hungry or eating more. So it's got to be not related to a medical problem. And then it's not a diagnosis that, you make online or by doing a questionnaire or by listening to a lecture at church. It needs to be made by, a professional. So that's just a little introduction about what depression actually is. Moving forward to how common it is, it's extremely common. Common in the wider Australian community, and unfortunately becoming increasingly common in our church as well. We have to be realistic about that. We're not insulated from it. We're not. So this is just some statistics from Beyond Blue, which is one of the research bodies in Australia for mental health. So in Australia, 1 in 7 men will experience depression in their lifetime. It's a huge number, 1 in 7. Between 2020 and 21, 37% of men who experienced a mental disorder saw a professional, compared with 54% of females. Who needs research to tell you that? The men don't talk, the men don't get help. Almost a fifth of women experience an affective disorder, and that affective disorder is an umbrella term for depression and a sort of lesser form of depression called dysthymia, which we won't talk about today, and bipolar disorder. So it's 1 in 7 men and a fifth of women. Moving to children or youth, 1 in 7 young people, 4 to 17, experience a mental health condition in any given year. And really scarily, 1 in 10 young people will self-harm, 1 in 13 will seriously consider a suicide attempt, and 1 in 40 will attempt suicide. 1 in 10 self-harm. That's broader, community numbers, but it's just what I want you to take away from this is that it's really common, and it's, thankfully, I don't think no one's done a study in the Coptic community, but anecdotally I can tell you I don't think it's anywhere near that common in the community, but definitely it's there. Definitely it's there. All of these things we have seen. So it's something which we shouldn't be naive about, thinking that this is a problem that's external to us. It's something that we need to be aware of and thinking about and praying about. What is the cause? And this is a very, very tricky question to answer because it's an area of ongoing research. But there's a few things to be conscious of. One big factor is family history. We know that depression runs in families. An additional challenge, in some communities is that people don't talk about it. So we don't know that your grandfather had depression, or that your auntie, or that whoever, we don't know. So that makes it a bit challenging when in some communities people don't like to talk about it. But we know that family history plays a huge part, a really huge part. Serious medical illness, of course, can, because it's really difficult. It's really difficult. I met a lady recently who has this really terrible autoimmune condition where she feels itchy all day and all night. And she's on all sorts of treatments and nothing seems to be working. And in her mind, the only way out is to die. And unfortunately, she's right. Is she going to feel depressed? Of course. Yeah. So sometimes serious medical illness can be, a really big cause. Life events as well. Sometimes people face horrendous circumstances. We see it on the news every day. Okay, and sometimes a really major life event can break somebody. Not permanently, but can break somebody. And if you think about those criteria that I mentioned in the beginning, and the fact that they need to be there by definition for only 2 weeks, it's plausible that somebody could have a really major life event, and that would make them have all of those things for 2 or 3 weeks. That's really plausible. Personality is another very big factor. So there are some people who their tendency is they worry a lot. They might be a bit more susceptible. Their self-esteem might be a little bit low because of their upbringing or because of other factors. They might be perfectionists by nature, and things are if they're not perfect, then they're rubbish. And things can never be perfect. So if things are always rubbish about me, about my partner, about my children, about my job, about the world, that's depressing. Sensitivity to personal criticism. Everybody's a bit different here. Some people, their temperament, you can go up to them and just tell them everything that you've just done and everything that you've just said is absolutely rubbish. And some people will hear that and say, thank you very much. I needed to hear that. You're absolutely right. You're helping me to be better. Other people, that will ruin their month because it's so personal and they hold on to it. You know, and it's because of temperament, it's because of personality. So that sensitivity sometimes, if someone's extremely sensitive, then things that people do or say or don't say can more quickly lead them to depression than somebody who's not as sensitive and being self-critical. Drug and alcohol use as well can be a factor, and changes in the brain, various neurotransmitters, and this is an area of ongoing research. Now, okay, how is it treated? So this is a really important thing to reflect on. So I think I may have depression, or somebody in my family, or a friend on the other side of the world. How is it treated? This is just the summary. First and foremost, spirituality plays a really important role. I think that this is a personal view, you know. So in the past, there has been a tendency maybe to think that depression is just a purely spiritual problem, and that if you or somebody that you know has this problem, then it reflects a lack of faith, and that you have to be spiritual, and that's it. There's a tendency, I think now, to maybe go too far on the other end of the spectrum and say, look, this is just a purely clinical, medical problem, and it needs, you know, medication straight away, and it needs treatment, and we forget about the spiritual side of things. But I think it's really important that we be balanced. We have to have both in some circumstances. So spirituality plays a really, really important role. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. A very important part of it, of course, is lifestyle. In particular, sleep, nutrition, physical activity, staying away from substances, especially alcohol. It plays a huge role. And you and I, we've already experienced that. How do you feel when you're going through a period of staying up late on your phone, not getting enough sleep, eating really unhealthy fried foods, and you just feel awful after? You know, not exercising, drinking a little bit, don't. We feel awful. And then you start to think, okay, I'm going to eat well, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to try to sleep a little bit better, I'm going to do all of these things. We think, oh, I feel so much better now. Why do I keep forgetting to do this? It's so, so, so important. Important for prevention, important for mild depression, important for even severe depression, and very important for the prevention of relapse as well. A lot of the time, people will be really on the road to recovery, doing really well, and they'll come in and say, look, I don't know what happened, but you know, I was going so well for the last few months, and now I feel terrible. And a lot of the time, it's because they let their lifestyle slip. So it's really important to remember how important, like, it's so important. Important for ourselves, important for our children, important that you model that for your children as well. So lifestyle factors are so important. Exercise is so critical. It's by God's design. It didn't have to be that way. God designed exercise. When your heart is racing, that releases various hormones, neurotransmitters, to give you a sense of calm, a sense of happiness, a sense of relax. God designed it that way. I didn't design it. You didn't design it. He's the one that designed it. So we have this weapon. We have this weapon. But we don't use it. Everyone must exercise. Don't tell me I'm old. Don't tell me it's cold. Don't tell me I get home. I don't care. You have to exercise. It's so important. And it's important that your children see you do that. If you see Abuna Ub's office, he has a pull-up bar. You know what I'm talking about? The pull-up bars that are on the doors. A few years ago, after Abuna had surgery on a hernia, we went to visit him at home, and we saw the pull-up bars at home. And then I walk in and say, "How are you, Abuna, recovering after the operation?" He says, "Do you want me to show you my pull-ups?" I thought, "Not today, Abuna, please." You know, it's so important. Psychology is another very important part of it, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about one of the things that psychologists do. Medications, of course, play a role. Not everybody with depression needs medication, but some people certainly do. How do you decide who needs medication and who doesn't? Just find somebody that you trust to help you make that decision. You know? But I'll give you two simple ways of thinking about who needs medication. Simple, okay? Number one is the person who we've tried the conservative things first. They're doing their best in their spiritual lives. They're doing their best with their lifestyle. They're doing their best seeing the psychologist once, twice, 3 times, but we're not getting anywhere. It's time to take the next step. And they're safe, and they're effective. So that's one category of person that might need medication. The second category is the person whose symptoms are fairly severe at presentation. Sometimes people can have a depression which is so deep that you tell them exercise, and they say, I can't even get out of bed. I spend 16 hours a day in my bed. What are you talking about exercise? I open my eyes and I just think I can't cope with another day, and I just try to sleep. How am I going to tell that person to exercise? You tell them, "Oh, let's go and see a psychologist." I don't want to talk to anybody. So they may know up here what they need to do, and they may be getting all of the right advice, but they're in a depression so deep that they can't actually bring themselves to take that first step. So that person, we can't say to them, only after you've tried A, B, C, D, then you can consider medication. That person needs medication probably a little bit early. Makes sense, right? And then there are other treatments as well. Sometimes people need to be admitted to hospital. And then there are more invasive treatments like ECT, which stands for electroconvulsive therapy. This is where the psychiatrist in the hospital will put people under a general anesthetic and basically run an electric current. And it's really, really, really effective. But that's for extreme cases. That's really effective. Really, really effective. It's amazing. Personally, when someone tells me that they're going to go and get that, I get excited. Because I think, okay, no, we've been things are going to get better now. Look, no one knows for sure. Honestly, I think it just resets. You know, I'm not a computer person, but you know how reset fixes things? Okay? And I'll tell you why I think that. Because there's another population of patients that do really well when in their recovery from depression. And that's people who have had a cardiac arrest. People who have had a cardiac arrest, and after they're resuscitated, a decent number of them don't need their antidepressants anymore. A decent number. It's really remarkable. I have no idea why. I have no idea why. I'm sure some clever person will investigate it one day. But it's effective. And then TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. So this one's a little bit less dramatic than the electric one. It's magnetic. Very importantly, just be happy is not one of the treatments. Just be happy, just smile. That's not one of the treatments. Okay? It's helpful, maybe, but it shouldn't be the only thing, that we're going to do. Does anybody have any questions so far, or anything that they'd like to add? Whatever you like. I've seen some of the questions on the app, and I think we'll address many of them as we go along. And then if there are some that are specific that haven't been answered, we can talk about them. So, oh yeah, sure. Please do. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what a psychologist does. So we'll start by saying what a psychologist doesn't do. Okay, and the psychologist doesn't do what you might have seen in movies, which is you go into their very nice office and they have a cup of tea and there's a leather lounge and you lie down and that's not what happens. Okay, sometimes that's people's perception of it. Another very important thing to be aware of is that sometimes people might say, oh look, I saw a psychologist and it didn't help. My friend saw a psychologist and it didn't help. So we just completely dismiss the idea of it. But that's illogical. Don't do that. Don't do that, and don't say that for your children, because, you've been to mechanics, that didn't help. No one stops going to mechanics. You've been to every other person who can help us and they haven't been helpful. We don't stop going. You've had teachers that probably didn't help you. Probably seen doctors that didn't help you that much. Right? I think in every one of your professions, you could say that I've gone and I didn't find it helpful. No one says, khalas, but this whole profession is useless. It's just that person, didn't connect with me. And that's another very important thing to remember, that the most important predictive factor in how a person will respond to treatment is not the qualifications of the psychologist or their knowledge or their experience, but it is the rapport, the relationship that's established between the person. That's the most important. That's what the research shows. Yeah, that's what the research shows. So they don't sit there and lie you down and talk about anything. They do many different things. One of the things that they do is this thing called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very well researched. That people who engage in CBT, do better than those who don't. And people whose depression is, moderate and needs a combination of medication and CBT will do better than those who do either one alone. So it's not something that's just philosophical. They research it very, rigorously. And that's, I guess, my very simple understanding of CBT is that the way that you think drives the way that you feel, not the reverse. Sometimes we misunderstand and say the way that I feel is actually what's influencing what I think. And the problem with that is you are not in control and I am not in control of what I feel. So I just become a helpless victim. But CBT is based on the principle that your thoughts drive your feelings or emotions, which drive your behaviors. And if you can change your thoughts, then you can actually change your feeling. Let me give you a really simple example. Let's say somebody walks in now through the side door. Okay? And then naturally we see movement, we hear noise, and we just look over. And then what do we see? Someone walking in. End of story. One person might observe everybody looking at them and just say, People just, it's natural. They saw movement, they heard noise, they looked at me, it's natural, it's not a big deal, carry on with their day. Another person will have the exact same trigger, and then their thoughts will go into overdrive. Everybody thinks I'm foolish, everyone is staring at me, I'm so embarrassed. Why did I come in from the front door? I should have went in from the back door. Why did I come? Why was I born? It's exactly the same incident, but the feelings of the two individuals are so different because of their thoughts. So what the psychologist can teach people to do is identify thoughts which are not helpful, or maybe which are incorrect, and then start to train you to redirect them, challenge your thoughts. St. Paul puts it in a really nice way, bringing every thought into the captivity of Christ. So and it's a very, very useful skill for actually everybody. You don't have to have depression to benefit from this principle of questioning my thoughts. Another thing that the psychologist may help people with is to identify unhelpful styles of thinking. And I promise you, as we go through this, you will find that you do lots of them, because I do lots of them as well. The way that I think drives the way that I feel. If I can change the way that I think, then I'll change the way that I feel, to some extent. Unhelpful thinking style. All or nothing thinking. Black and white thinking. If I'm not perfect, I've failed. Either I do things right or not at all. Is that something that sounds familiar in you or in someone that you know? It's a recipe for frustration all the time, because nothing can be perfect all the time. So then if it's not perfect, if it's 98%, but your 98% actually is 0 in your mind, then I'm failing at everything. Or your son or your daughter feels like they're failing at everything. And that's difficult. A mental filter. Only paying attention to certain types of evidence. Noticing our failures, but not seeing our successes. So that's really important. Sometimes we build a narrative in our mind about what we are, or what somebody else is. And we just focus on anything that kind of proves that, and just dismiss anything that doesn't. And you're not being fair to yourself and to others. It's an unhelpful way of thinking. Jumping to conclusions. 2 + 2 = 5. There's 2 key types of jumping to conclusions. Mind reading and fortune telling. How often do we do that? I'll tell you the best one. شوف بتبص لي ازاي. How do you know what's going on in her mind? How do you know she's even looking at you? You know? Or thinking about the future. Again, this is a temperament thing. Some personalities do it more than others. But we have a situation, and then we look at all of the potential problems, and we solve all of those problems before anything has happened. It's not helpful. It's exhausting. It stops you from taking any positive step in your life because you think of 100 reasons why you shouldn't take it. Overgeneralizing, disqualifying the positive, catastrophizing, or inappropriately minimizing are some others. Just move on for the sake of time. Emotional reasoning. So this is an important one. Assuming that because we feel a certain way, that what we think must be true. The example they give is, I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. Just because my emotions are strong doesn't mean that what I think is true. You want the best proof of that? Just drive home tonight. You'll find someone that cuts you off and thinks that you did the wrong thing, and what are you doing, and inta mugrim, and actually hum alla khaltanin. But because their feelings are so strong, they confuse that. That because the emotions are strong, then it must be true. It's not. Just because your emotions are strong doesn't mean that what you're feeling so strongly about is true. Labeling, using words like should or must, and inappropriately taking the blame for things. This is my fault. Just regarding thoughts, I'll just share with you like a simple model that might be helpful, to you or to somebody that you know. So any thought that you might have, you need to first ask yourself the question, what is the evidence for what I am thinking? What is the evidence for what I'm thinking? If there is no evidence for what you are thinking, then we must dismiss the thought. It's false, it's unhelpful, it's incorrect. It's just going to lead me into a spiral. No one loves me. What is the evidence for what you're thinking? Well, actually, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. You have a husband that cares for you. You have family that ask about you. You have servants that care for you. You have people that visited you when you were sick. What is the evidence for what I am thinking? If there is no evidence, you dismiss. How do we dismiss a thought? You might develop your own strategies over time. The Jesus prayer is very powerful. Praying the Psalms is very powerful. Exercising, doing something different, changing your environment. Even doing something which requires concentration, a hobby, playing a musical instrument, whatever you like to do. But don't sit there and dwell on the thought. Put another way, if you have a dark room and we want to have light in that room, what do? Do any of us try to push the darkness out of the dark room? Or do we turn the light on? Of course we turn the light on. And sometimes it's like that with thoughts that are unhelpful. Even thoughts about other people which we feel are not fitting and not proper. And we just try to push the thoughts out. Just turn the light on. Stop trying to push the darkness out and turn the light on. Turn on the Word of God. Turn on, some hymns. Turn on the liturgy. Turn on a spiritual book. Turn on a hobby that you like. So if there is no evidence, dismiss the thought. Now, if there is evidence, then we move to step 2. Because some things there is evidence for, okay? So for example, you might have a thought that I am worried I'm going to lose my job. Okay? What is the evidence? Everyone left, right and center is getting retrenched. And I'm next. So you've got evidence. Let's move on to step 2. Is it a helpful thought? If it is helpful, keep thinking about it. And if it is not, then just allocate it to one of the saints. Keep thinking about it and keep doing something about it. So for example, like students, okay, they worry about their exams. Right? What is the evidence for what I'm thinking? Yeah, امتحان بعد بكرة. Like there's good evidence. Is it a helpful thought? Yes, ذاكر. Okay? But then you have the students that just worry about everything, every question, after the exam, next exam, worry about university, worrying about it. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. So what do? Allocate it to one of the saints. Say, Mary, خلاص أنا عملت اللي عليا. I'm still worried. خلاص please, you take over from here. Develop a friendship with one of the saints. St. Paul writes about thoughts, finally, brethren, whatever things are pure, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things, I said pure instead of true earlier. Whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Not these worries that are baseless or useless that we're currently meditating on. Replace it with this. Stop trying to push the darkness out and consider turning the light on. we'll shift now into just some do's and don'ts in supporting someone with depression. And it's important just to say that every person is different and every case is different, and there's no manual that's going to be applicable in all circumstances. So if you're not sure, then it's good to get advice, and to get advice from a few different sources as well, and just to take what you think might be helpful in your situation. So do pray for them. As I mentioned before, yes, there's medication, there's psychology, there's lots of things, but don't underestimate the power of prayer. You know, I was having a chat with Father Anthony and Father Mark and Father David about, you know, supporting people with depression. And Father Anthony asked, you know, fathers, what do you recommend? What should I do if somebody comes and you know, seems to have a problem with depression? Okay, and I just went into like this. You know, psychology, and these are the psychologists that we trust who are good, and this is the GPs that you can send to, and. And then Father Mark very wisely said, yes, all of that. And please, Abuna, don't underestimate the impact that your fatherhood can have on them. It's full of wisdom, this response. So pray for them. Don't underestimate the power of prayer. Just as you pray for somebody who's got any other medical problem, who's receiving treatment, pray. Listen to them. And that's very important. Hear what they have to say. Hear their perspective. In the conversation, if the feeling, especially of a young person, is that you're not listening, they're going to switch off. If the feeling is the purpose of this conversation is for you to speak rather than for them to listen, they're going to switch off. Listen to them. It sounds very obvious, but it's something that sometimes we forget to do in our desire to help and to fix and to provide information. We must listen. Shoulder to shoulder can be more effective than face to face. Okay, this is useful, especially if you've got teenage children, right? If you sit down, you know, it's like an interview. It's okay, let's talk about, you know, your mood, and you're not like, they're just going to switch off, or they're just going to say what you want to hear to get themselves out of there. The shoulder to shoulder is a little bit less intimidating for them. Go for a drive, go for a walk, do something together, so that it's okay if we talk, and it's okay if there's silence. If you're looking at someone face to face and there's silence, every second feels like a year. When you're just next to each other, going for a drive, or going for a walk, it's natural. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. So if you find that you can't get anything out of your teenager, try shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. Do follow up with them. Do encourage them. And sometimes you need to help them facilitate additional support. So you might tell them, let's go and see a GP. Let's go and think about seeing a psychologist. Let's go and see a Abuna. And sometimes the person may be willing, but needs that extra push. Right? So with their permission, don't do things behind their back. With their permission, how about I'll make an appointment for you? How about I'll give Abuna a buzz and we'll, you know, go and sit down and have a chat? Sometimes people say yes to that. They just need your little push. A very important do break confidentiality if there's a concern regarding safety. Like, thank God this is a very rare situation, but if there's a concern about safety of a child that may harm themselves, or even an adult, confidentiality goes out the window, completely out the window, with a clear conscience. And if it does get to that, where somebody, you're really starting to worry about their safety, that they might harm themselves soon unless we do something, rest assured that things can still improve, even from there. They will be upset with you for a short time, but that's okay, it's only for a short time. They'll be grateful later. You know, I've seen this a number of times, and Even if it gets to this really dark day, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. As we pray in one of the litanies, I can't remember which one, He is the hope of the hopeless, the help of the helpless, the comfort of the faint-hearted, and my favourite expression, the harbour of those who are in the storm. Isn't that a beautiful expression? You're on a storm, and you don't know if it's day or night, as St. Paul experienced, and you think, Khalas, this is the end, and then you see the harbour, and that harbour is Christ. Even if it gets to this dark day, it's never too late. It's never too late. A number of years ago, I received a call from somebody saying, Gabuna, I wasn't actually a priest at the time. It was a friend of mine, and he said, I've taken an overdose of all of my medications. And I said to him, okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll call an ambulance and I'll meet you at your place soon. He said, don't call an ambulance, I'm not going. I said, thanks for letting me know. I'll call the police too so that they can force you to go. And I'll see you soon. And of course, Yani, he was so upset with me that day. But who cares? He's safe. He's alive. And by God's grace, he's doing really well. Married, happy. You would never know. You're never going to lose hope. One of my patients, as a teenage boy, asked out a girl. The girl said no. He jumped off a cliff. And he was in hospital for 5 months with the most unbelievable injuries. Unbelievable. He survived. Of course, he has some disability from his injuries. He walks in. How are you? Good. How's everything? Good. You want to talk about what happened? Yeah, that was dumb. I'm at TAFE now. I'm enjoying studying something, getting his driver's license. Amazing. It's really amazing. It's never too late. And I give you these two extreme examples so that hopefully, I pray that no one's experienced anything similar. But if you have, there's hope. And if whatever difficulty you're going through or your loved one is going through, there's hope. Don't dismiss them. Things like, it will be okay, and don't worry. People need to be listened to and their feelings validated. Don't try to force them to see someone when they're not ready. This is really important. When you have a loved one who's going through a difficult time, and you're like, okay, we have to go, but it doesn't work. The person has to be wanting to. Of course, if there's an issue about safety, that's different. But if there's no concerns about safety, they have to go when they're ready. Why? Because sometimes we think about what the next step is. Okay, let's go and see the psychologist. Let's force them, let's pressure them. طب وبعدين? They're going to go and they're going to sit in the chair. And وبعدين? Unless they're willing to open up, there's really nothing that they can do. Nothing. So it has to be when the person is ready. Don't be angry with them. Sometimes we see this, especially children, like when they have depression, sometimes that can manifest as, similar to the adult criteria that I mentioned earlier. But sometimes the children can be a little bit rebellious, and we misunderstand it. Sometimes when children cry out for help, go and see the school counsellor, talk to their Sunday school teachers. The parents may be angry with them, put pressure on them to keep problems private. It's very isolating for a child in particular to feel like I'm hurting and I'm not allowed to talk about it to anybody. So just direct them to people who you feel comfortable with and that you trust. Sometimes we even have children self-harming, cutting themselves with various things. And when their parents find out, they get them in trouble. That happens. حد يعمل كده. Yeah, it's a cry for help. The child needs understanding and compassion, and not criticism. And don't nag. Okay, we've touched on these, some secret weapons, okay, in managing depression, in addition to the various clinical things we've talked about. Of course, the intercession of Saint Mary and the saints, the liturgy, Matanyam, the Psalms, especially 119. And look, this might be a little bit unpopular, but consider another perspective. Could this depression be something that God has permitted for my edification, for my purification, a cure from my pride or from my excessive self-reliance? Could it be like that this is something that I might struggle with, but I look towards my eternity? I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that shall be revealed in us. And one of my favorite verses in 2 Corinthians talks about how we comfort others with the comfort with which we have received. St. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 1, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." God comforts me so that I can comfort others in their time of need. Could it be God is opening up the door for me or for my loved one? Who can understand the darkness of depression better than somebody who went through that themselves and supports family, friends, Sunday school children, and so on? Could it be that there's another perspective to consider? I'll just have a look at some of the questions that were sent, and if anybody in the meantime has anything they'd like to add, please feel free. Okay. So there's quite a lot, so I'm not sure. I'll just see how we go. So I know someone who sometimes feels so sad, they stay alone in bed, they can't push themselves to do anything, but it's not a permanent mode, that only happens sometimes. What can he do about that? So if you just keep in mind the definition of depression, 2 weeks, okay? If that's the case for 2 weeks or more than likely that would constitute a diagnosis, and this would be one of the people that I would mention, as I mentioned earlier, might need early medication because they can't actually bring themselves to do what needs to be done. If it's a short amount of time, then I would focus on some of those other measures: their spiritual life, their lifestyle, seeing the psychologist, learning a few strategies to deal with things, earlier on. So for me, a really critical part of this is the duration. My husband and daughter both have depression. It's too much for me to handle at home. And we pray. We pray for each other. And this is why it's so important to have meetings like this. It's not just information, it's not just sharing ideas, but a very important part of this is prayer for each other. As you saw in the statistics earlier on, the numbers are enormous, and the numbers, include our community as well. So for that person, please know that we all, as a church family, are praying for you. Okay, can prayer and church alone cure persistent depression? I feel guilty for seeking professional help because my belief in being close to God should alleviate my depression. I hope by now that you kind of can see that there's nothing to feel guilty about. It's important that we do both, okay? Just like we would with any other illness. We go and do what the doctors say, but we get Abuno Agostinos to pray for us as well, okay? And by the way, don't underestimate this man. So, okay, if you need a miracle, it's good. We have access to really, we've seen miracles from this man. We really have. So, just send him your request, and the Lord will do the rest. Okay, work is very stressful, and I hate going there. So hard to get up every day for work. I come back so stressed that I can't even talk to my kids and find myself screaming a lot, and I hate myself now. And so, look, sometimes our situations can be, really difficult. And if work is unhappy, or if you have an unhappy period in your relationship, that can push you to depression. I would encourage that person, to speak to their confession father, but also just to recognize that just as physical pain is a gift from God and can be helpful to prevent further damage, so is psychological pain. Just to put it in a simple way, if you put your hand on a hot plate and it didn't hurt, is that good or bad? It's terrible. We need it to hurt. Why? Because it tells us that, hey, if you keep doing this, things are going to get worse. You better take your hand off the hot plate. So physical pain is helpful because it protects us from further damage. But to some extent, psychological pain can be helpful. To some extent, it can be helpful. For example, if somebody is working 85 hours a week, which sometimes, and if you have to do that out of necessity to keep your home afloat, I'm not talking to you. God support you and be with you during these difficult times. I'm not talking to the people that have to do that to survive. But if you're working 85 hours a week to fund a very luxurious lifestyle and you're depressed, okay, you need to get your hand off the hot plate. You need to get your hand off the hot plate. It's a mechanism from God to prevent further damage. What would you say about a doctor who, when the patient comes in and their hand is burned from the hot plate, and they start to put creams on there and say, oh, here, take this, tahirayahak. But the hand's still on the hot plate. We're going to say, this guy's crazy. What are you doing? What are you doing? So I think a very important principle to take away is that, like, when you feel something like psychological distress, reflect on the possibility that a part of it may actually be helpful for us to adapt something. Maybe my lifestyle is not healthy. Maybe my work-life balance is not correct. Maybe, I need to change something rather than just keep the environment exactly the same and just medicate it. But again, I'm not talking about the people that have to do that in order to survive during these difficult times. Okay. In our church, there's little compassion for mental illness. Stigma persists, labeling sufferers as crazy. When will this change? Let's empathize and create a supportive environment for those in need. I hope having frank conversations like this can be one small piece of that puzzle, of just trying to pray for each other and support each other and respect each other, especially considering, how prevalent it is, and it can come to our doors anytime. Okay, the other questions are extremely specific, so please forgive me for not discussing them in detail, but if anybody would like to just have a chat, my door is open just to brainstorm with you. I'm not an expert, but I can pray with you and think with you. And I'll just conclude with just a really important thing that I want you to take away. Depression is not weakness, it's not lack of faith, it's not anything to be ashamed of, but it's something which we can deal with a combination of spirituality, which is, in my view, the most important thing, and also lifestyle intervention, psychology, and medication. If you are not sure about what you need to do, then a very good place to start is any one of the fathers here. And certainly we're blessed to have so many Coptic GPs and psychologists who, are very helpful. And things can get better, and they will get better, and they do get better. They do get better. They do get better. So it doesn't have to be like this forever. Okay, thank you for listening, and glory be to God forever. Amen.